we here at the Libertarian Party, we believe that you are the ones that are able to make the best decision for you and your family.
There were some travellers in full Tyvek suits with
Oh, yeah.
respirators,
Yeah.
and I took a picture of them, but I kicked myself that I didn't do a selfie.
There's obviously lots of people in positions of power who recognise that what they did was wrong, ethically wrong.
Hello and welcome to the Aussie Wire News. The team has returned from covering the inaugural Alliance for Responsible Citizenship launch in London, and the Aussie Wire News is resuming business as usual. But I wanted to begin today's episode with a debrief from AHPRA, and what fun, I'm going to give a good whack to a few of the trolls that have done a very poor job of attacking AHPRA. Now, to be clear, I'm not an AHPRA spokesperson or representative. The Aussie Wire paid our own way to AHPRA, we paid our own tickets to get in, we paid our own accommodation and airfares, we even paid extra to have that location that we had inside the atrium of the conference centre where we did our interview. So in no way is anything that I say to be misconstrued as being from AHPRA, nor is it funded, sponsored or in any way compromised by AHPRA. These opinions that I'm about to give you are entirely my own. Okay, with that disclaimer out of the way, let me tell you about AHPRA by responding to some of the more absurd claims that I've seen floating around the internet. Lots of examples of the headline "Is AHPRA WEF 2.0" abound all over the internet all of a sudden. There's been articles and videos, and some have gotten a decent number of views. Well played to their respective creators. That is topic jacking at its best. But if you believe that AHPRA is WEF 2.0, then honestly you don't understand what the World Economic Forum is. Let me put it in plain, blunt terms. The World Economic Forum is an apocalyptic death cult that sees the human race as a cancer on the face of the earth and thinks that they are the chemotherapy. They are doing everything they can to eliminate or reduce this cancer, that's us, by forcing policies down upon us from their Davos ivory tower meetings that get implemented worldwide to bring about their great reset, as their dear leader Klaus Schwab calls it. That's the World Economic Forum. Their ideology is anti-human, their goal is total control leading to fewer human beings and impoverished lives, and their methodology is central planning. The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship is not WEF 2.0. The AHPRA's ideology is pro-human. Their goal is human flourishing, and their methodology is empowering people at the lowest levels to solve their own problems. Now that alone should be enough to settle this debate. AHPRA is not and cannot, for as long as they stay true to those ideologies, goals and methodologies, they cannot be WEF 2.0. But that's not good enough for the doubters and knockers and black pill crowd who are absolutely certain that AHPRA is controlled opposition. So, there are many articles and videos and blog posts declaring AHPRA to be WEF 2.0 and proving that AHPRA are just controlled opposition with graphs and charts with circles around people's names and black and white images to make it all feel a bit sinister. In other words, articles that look a lot like this. This is the Black Pill Brigade, people who believe in conspiracy for conspiracy's sake, people for whom nothing less than ideological perfection is ever good enough, and a single blemish, and believe me, they can always find at least one, is enough to completely write you off. Write off everything you do, everyone you know, and everyone who's ever had anything to do with you. By way of example, let's look at one common glib criticism that is rolled out as if it's a complete open and shut case, like there's no need for any further analysis. The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship is by billionaires for billionaires. End of story. Well, there's two parts to that criticism. There's by billionaires and there's for billionaires, and I'll dissect them one at a time. The accusation that AHPRA is by billionaires is absolutely true. It's also a matter of public record, and looking up public documents and pretending like you've unearthed some deeply guarded secret is just cynical clickbait. Newsflash: billionaires exist. And unless you're a Marxist eat-the-rich type, they're going to continue to exist. And given that billionaires exist, would you rather they joined the World Economic Forum and contributed to their command and control top-down violent anti-human vision for the future? Or perhaps would you prefer that they contributed to something else that's at the very least less bad and at the very least doesn't want to kill 90% of the human population? So is AHPRA by billionaires? Yes, it is. That's a public record. And that's also why you've heard of it. If it weren't for billionaire backers and high-profile speakers, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If elites weren't involved, then there would be nothing for the knockers to knock. Lots of people have started lots of ideologically perfect initiatives in the last few years, and absolutely none of them have gotten traction. Why has AHPRA gotten traction? Why are these knockers spending time attacking AHPRA when they didn't feel the need to attack those other initiatives? Well, it's because they've heard of AHPRA. And they heard of it because it's backed by billionaires and cultural elites. Get over it. You would never have heard of it otherwise. Your options are to have something imperfect, but something that gets traction because it's backed by billionaires, or to have something maybe ideologically perfect that goes absolutely nowhere. Why did the World Economic Forum get so much traction and do so much harm in the first place? Because it was backed by billionaires and cultural elites. So let's be glad that there are billionaires out there that are willing to spend their money on something that isn't the World Economic Forum. The fact that it's backed by billionaires tells you nothing about its guiding ideology, about its goals or its methods. In other words, it says nothing about what it is, which means that saying AHPRA is by billionaires is at best a lazy, meaningless cheap shot. But what about the second part? Is AHPRA for billionaires? It is by billionaires, that's true. Is it for billionaires? Well, no. The World Economic Forum is for billionaires, but the AHPRA's chosen method of operation shows that they are not. The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship specifically rejects the use of coercion or force or central planning to carry out any part of its vision. Every initiative that comes from or that it supports must be voluntary. The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship is not coming up with position statements for its members to endorse and then enforce onto their respective member nations. That's what the World Economic Forum do, and that's how they've done so much damage. But the whole point of AHPRA, the whole idea, is to connect people with each other so that they can then come up with the necessary solutions for their challenges in their part of the world for themselves. They can be inspired by AHPRA, they can be supported by AHPRA, they can network and find allies at AHPRA, but ultimately the solutions that they propose and the initiatives that they pursue will not come from AHPRA, but from those people getting together and figuring it out for themselves. So it's by billionaires, yes, but it's certainly not for billionaires. And these conspiracy articles trying to take down AHPRA go on to talk about which billionaire knows who or did business with some other billionaire, and they create a big map of the grand controlled opposition conspiracy theory that is supposedly the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Right now, I'm no doubt being added in onto that map somewhere by these sorts of people. But honestly, all of that is just noise. Because if AHPRA stay true to their ideology, to their goal, to their methodology, then who did business with whom back in 1990 whatever and who got funding from where is irrelevant. And think about it, if they don't stay true to that vision, to their goal, to their methodology, then all those things are still absolutely irrelevant. What matters is that we keep them accountable to that vision that they've articulated, which is why the Aussie Wire decided to be there at our own expense and see AHPRA take shape from the very beginning. Because, as Rachel Dawes said to Batman, it's not who you are underneath, it's what you do that defines you. And like all of us, AHPRA will be defined by what it does. Now, I've sat with many of these people, on the record with some and off the record with others, and I've looked in their eyes and I've watched their body language, and I believe they absolutely mean what they say. And that's nice, but ultimately irrelevant, because it's what they do that matters. They have the right ideals, of that I'm fairly sure, but that doesn't mean they'll deliver on them perfectly, which is why we need to keep them accountable. But the noise and the fury that we're witnessing online has nothing to do with what they're doing, and it has nothing to do with keeping them accountable. It's just a distraction and a waste of energy, causing division for no reason. Will the AHPRA save the world? No, of course not. But if it's true to its vision, then it will inspire and empower many people to do far more good than these knockers and black pillars ever will. The Alliance for Responsible Citizenship is, at least, trying to do some good in the world, imperfect though it will inevitably be. I'm not saying that everyone should get on board, that's entirely up to you. But at least give it some time. Give it a chance to create a track record based on what it does, and then judge it by that. And in the meantime, let's stop attacking each other and creating division where there simply doesn't need to be any. Now, here's the news. Well, there is a by-election happening in the seat of Mulgrave, and if Mulgrave sounds familiar, it might be because it's the former seat of the former Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews. He, of course, went to that election, won quite convincingly, but he went to the election making the promise that if he won, he would see out his term. That turned out to be just another one in a long string of politically convenient lies, and of course he left, and now the Victorian taxpayer is on the hook for yet another by-election. Well, there's lots of people throwing their hat into the ring, most notably, probably, you may remember the Slugging victim Ian Cook. He's thrown his hat in the ring again, but there is, of course, also a candidate from the Libertarian Party who joins me now. Ethelyn King, how are you?
Very good, thank you, Topher. How are you?
Doing very well. You found some shade under the tree there. The weather in Melbourne looks characteristically gorgeous for this time of year. What's the response that you're getting? This is during pre-polling, of course, so we have the election day itself coming up, but this is pre-polling. What's the response that you're getting?
Yeah, look, it's been a good response. So we are week 2 now of pre-poll, so it is slowly starting to pick up. But we here at the Libertarian Party, we're getting some good traction. People are really responding to the name. People are responding to our policies, which is fantastic to hear.
Well, of course, the name has been recently changed. You were the Liberal Democratic Party, and full disclosure, I used to be a member of the Liberal Democratic Party, so obviously my ideological sympathies lie with you guys still. Do you reckon that name change has made a difference? Do you think you're getting better recognition and better interest now with the new brand?
We are, and what we are getting are questions about who we are as a party. You know, when we were the Liberal Democrats, there were a little bit of, I guess, brand confusion, and people would think that we were the Liberal Party. So here, as the Libertarian Party, people are like, what's the Libertarian Party? What does that mean? What do you stand for? So it's been really good to introduce our policies, introduce what we stand for.
And does that response stay positive after you start answering that question? When they actually hear the policies, does that remain, or do they just kind of, oh no?
No, it does. It does, because what we're telling people is that it's your life, it's your choice. And we're telling people that, you know, we here at the Libertarian Party, we believe that you are the ones that are able to make the best decision for you and your family, not the government. And that really seems to be resonating with people. We're talking about cost of living, which is another thing. And by talking about cost of living, you know, we have tangible policies to make things better, like cutting out stamp duty, like cutting out the payroll tax so that people have more money in their pockets. So these tangible policies that we have are really resonating with people.
So I want to apologise in advance for being a bit of a political wonk here, but I want to talk preferences for a moment. The polls at the moment seem to be indicating that it's very unlikely for someone to win on primary. It's almost certain that whoever does win is going to need some preferences. Can you tell us a little bit about your preferences, and in particular, because I haven't looked this up, I could have, and I apologise I haven't. Are you working with Ian Cook? He's a candidate that I have a lot of time for and a man that I have a lot of respect for, especially after all he's been through. Is there a preference sharing relationship there?
So we are number 2 on Cook's How to Vote card, and they are number 2 on our How to Vote card. Brilliant. So we have each put number 2. Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, how are you feeling, Ethelyn? You're not an idiot. You're well aware that throwing your hat in the ring and running in a political campaign, your chances of winning are not non-existent, but they're not high at the same time. How are you feeling internally? It's an enormous sacrifice for you. What are you going to be telling yourself? Let's start with the worst case scenario. What are you going to be telling yourself on election day if it's evident that you're not going to be the one who's elected? Will it feel worth it?
I'm under no illusion that, you know, we are going to win. We're a small party, we're a new party, and we are up against 2 big machines, such as Labor and Liberal. So I am under no illusion that we are going to win the seat. What this is about is bringing our policies out there. It's bringing libertarian ideals out to the public. It's letting people know who we are, that we're here, and that we are wanting people to be in control of their lives. You know, we want people to know that we believe in parental rights. We want people to know that we have energy policies. And we want people to know that we support small businesses. So that's what we're here for. It's not about me winning the seat, whilst it would be nice. I'm under no illusion that that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, Ethelyn King, thank you so much for joining us here on the Aussie Wire. I wish you all the very best, and may this be the beginning of often it takes a few different elections and people sort of find their place and find where they can really flourish. Just before we go, though, if someone did want to get onto a polling booth for you, hand out how to vote cards and support you in that way, if they're in that Mulgrave area, where would they go to be able to find you?
No, absolutely. Please go to our website. You'll be able to sign up and register there. So it's ldp.org.au. You'll be able to sign up to be a volunteer.
Fantastic. Ethelyn King, all the best. Thanks for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Topher.
Well, here at the Aussie Wire, we've been following and helping to tell the stories of a number of different doctors who each in their own way are fighting different but similar fights against suspension or various other forms of censure because of the stand that they took during the COVID crisis. Well, today we get to talk to the OG. He was the very first one to be suspended by AHPRA, and well, you know what? I'm not going to tell his story for him. Dr. Paul Oosterhuis, thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Wonderful to be here, Topher.
Now, Paul, you've been a busy man. You managed to get yourself deregistered or have your license suspended before anybody else. You also managed to have your very first interview basically destroy the social media account of the person who interviewed you. So we're going to have to be really careful here. I don't want the Aussie Wire to just get completely gutted and kicked off YouTube. However, we do also need to speak the truth. So, Doctor, there's a lot of people that don't know your story. You've told your story and you're a regular on the No Goat Show, which is, of course, Cafe Lockdown, Michael Gray Griffith and the team there that do a wonderful job. You've told your story there, but for those that don't know, tell us what happened with this suspension and what you did in return.
Well, I'm a senior specialist in anaesthesia and practiced in anaesthesia and critical care for 32 years. And I was highly critical of what was going on, the lockdowns, the mandates. I saw the harm being done from them. I understood very early on that you could treat COVID. Vitamin D, zinc, hydroxy.
And other things.
Hydroxy and ivy, yeah. And I felt I had an ethical responsibility to tell the world, to alleviate fear, keep people out of hospital. As a critical care specialist, it was my job to if I could simply prevent people from getting into hospital, getting into intensive care and dying. That's my job. I've been doing that for 32 years. So I was horrified at what was happening in the healthcare system. I was horrified about the COVID policies, the lack of basis for lockdowns, for masks. I lived, ate, and slept that. So, in 2021, I got immediate action powers for public protection because I was saying these things. But the truth is, I think it was a tweet to Brad Hazard, the health minister, on the day that 24,000 school kids were being rounded up at Pacer Arena and injected with the experimental gene jab, synthetic gene jab. And I said, I put up a chart of the infection fatality rate by age and said, look, in this age group, times 24,000 times 0.0016%. You would expect 0 kids to die. And if you have even one death, you have a signal of harm and you should be watching. 2 hours later, I became an immediate threat to public health or really the political health of one health minister. So I had a suspension hearing on the 3rd of September 2021. I was told not to turn up by Serene Tahafale, provided feedback, said it's a kangaroo court, don't go. But I went there because I wanted to put it on the public record. I didn't want them to have a chance to say, we didn't know. In my hearing, I laid out that they had an obligation to provide informed consent, that there were no long-term safety studies, that this was a novel technology that had skipped the normal testing phases for a gene therapy, and that it was in fact a gene therapy, not a vaccine.
All of which is well established. I mean, none of that is controversial if you've actually paid any attention to the data that we have.
It was highly controversial in 2021 to be saying the things I said, and I was duly suspended. And that's where I my first interview was Maria Z not long after it, and that's where I got into. She said, just before we went on, she said, "Look, you can't say IV. I still can't say it. IV.
Yeah, that's right.
IV,
Oxy,
hydroxy,
all those things.
But the thing, or even natural immunity. So yeah, unfortunately, I trashed her Instagram channel that night.
Which is a shame because she does good work, and
she's back. She
is back. Yes, she is. Yeah.
So the next step was that I became activated because they targeted me. I was the first doctor that they targeted, and I'm a member of the senior staff. I knew the president of the medical council. I'd worked with him for 20 years. So I could have been on the medical council board myself. And so, I didn't take it lightly. And so in February, because I went to protests, I went down to Melbourne without a mask, walking around Tullamarine Airport, expecting to be crash tackled at any moment because I was actually standing up without a mask. I could.
Don't you know that the virus is at that height? If you sit down without a mask, it's fine, but the minute you stand up, you're going to get hit, man. It's dangerous.
There was a guy. There were some travellers in full Tyvek suits with respirators, and I took a picture of them, but I kicked myself that I didn't do a selfie. It would have been classic. I was engaged. I went to Epic Camp. I was one of the very, very few doctors in that crowd of 500,000 people marching on. At the front of, but it was a great film. Anyway, so in February, as a result of the people I met, I sued the Medical Council of New South Wales in the Supreme Court.
Right.
And I did it without a lawyer, just representing myself. With a little bit of help from my friends explaining what the legal arguments were.
You do realise the truism that he who represents himself in court has a fool for a client. You've heard that before, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah, well, it's true. Yet, as I went on, I became more and more confident that actually what they had done was unlawful, and that I wanted to argue that. And after about 12 directions hearings, and with a bit of luck from Russell Pridgeon's decision in the Supreme Court of Appeal in New South Wales, they went hot, and the Health Commission dropped their complaint, and my suspension was lifted.
Wow!
So that was that. So I was the first doctor, I believe, in Australia to be suspended for defying the gag orders of AHPRA. And I was the first doctor to be unsuspended through the action in the courts.
But of course, by doing it that way, by dropping the suspension prior, if I've misunderstood the story, correct me, but it never got to the point where a court found in your favour. It got to the point where they dropped the matter. And so therefore they've avoided you setting a precedent that could have helped others.
I wanted a precedent. I desperately wanted a precedent. That was really the goal. It wasn't that I wanted to rush back to practice because I had there were still mandates hanging over me.
Yeah, right.
I was seeing that my colleagues were doing harm and behaving unethically. And I as much as I loved my years of practice, my dad often asked, why did you go into anaesthetics? And to me, it was the best job in the world because I could. It was dramatic. It was life and death. And I could make an immediate difference to people's lives. I could bring them back from the brink. I could alleviate their pain. It was a great honor to do it, but I couldn't do it in the craziness of what had happened.
Well, Dr. Paul Oosterhuis, thank you so much for bringing us up to date on that part of your story. There is, of course, so much more going on with you, and we've agreed that sometime next week I'm going to do a deep dive with you. We're going to have to publish that on Rumble and other places where we can just speak freely. We can talk for as long as it takes because that is only just one very small part of your story. There's so much more to it. There's so much more to discuss about what you knew early on when it came to early treatments, all the way through to what we know now and where all of that is going. So, for the moment, let's not call this the end. Let's call this a pause in our discussion. Dr. Paul Oosterhuis, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you both.
Well, thanks to our regular correspondent Rebecca Barnett, we've been introduced to the work of Ursula Edgington from New Zealand. She's the one who first uncovered or first brought to our attention the fact that there had been some exemptions provided by the New Zealand government for some of their workers, preferred workers perhaps, but there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and in fact, frankly, impossible to know information around this. So what we decided to do was to bring Ursula Edgington on herself so that we can try and wrap our heads around what do we know, what don't we know, and what's it like trying to get information out of the New Zealand government? Ursula, welcome so much to the. Thank you so much for coming on to the Aussie Wire.
Thanks, Topher. Thanks for inviting me on.
So it was initially it was your work trying to extract information from the New Zealand government to understand the truth of what's really happened with these vaccine exemptions. Can you bring us up to date with what you've learnt so far, not only about the exemptions, but also about how hard they're working not to tell you about it?
Yeah, so just to backtrack a little bit, the OIA, the Official Information Act request that I put in was actually some time ago at the end of the vaccine in inverted commas mandates for the healthcare workers here, which was about this time last year. And somebody more recently published an OIA on their Substack, NZDoc, that presented some data which didn't really tally with the OIA response that I had got, but I hadn't published at that time. So I went back to the original OIA, tried to make sense of it. And yeah, I mean, the interpretation or misinterpretation of the OIA questions that we pose is central to this. A single word in a sentence can prevent the correct response from being from coming from New Zealand government, or it can just mean that they just don't respond at all. So it's very much a case, in my experience with OIAs, in the 10 years that I've been in New Zealand, I have sent quite a lot. In fact, all the authorities probably think, oh God, not this woman again. But, you have to just keep persisting. It is a case of drilling down. You get one general answer, and then that will present more questions. And then you'll go on, drill further and further down to what you hope is the valuable information that they probably don't want you to get to.
So what do you believe you've actually been able to learn so far? What can we say with any degree of confidence out of this?
We can say with a degree of confidence that there was an enormous amount of secrecy surrounding the vaccine exemptions that were granted under what they called the significant service disruption category. So there was basically two categories of people in terms of applications to their employer that would allow them to not be vaccinated and still carry on with their work in the various sectors. And you'll know from your experience in Australia, Topher, that different sectors had different vaccine mandates applied at different times. So that sort of, confuses the issue even more in some ways. But certainly in terms of the healthcare sector, there was up to 11,000 people that we know of who were granted these vaccine exemptions. A lot of them were in, administration stroke senior positions, but there were also a lot of doctors and nurses. It would be fascinating to know whether those doctors and nurses actually administered the injections themselves whilst being exempted. The ethics around that and the informed consent that was missing is pretty shocking, to be honest.
Ursula, I want to try and be fairly precise about what we do and what we don't know. In terms of the number of exemptions that were granted, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, these were exemptions granted by category. It's not as though they had 11,000 individuals apply for exemptions and have them granted or anything like that. They were granted to entire categories of people. Do we have any idea how many people actually exercised the exemption as opposed to had it but may or may not have exercised it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that, again, is something that we don't really have any clear information of. In spite of repeated requests to the various, authorities. So there were definitely application forms for individuals, and I've got copies of those.
Okay.
There were also applications that were done on a general basis for large industries, commercial industries that, like Fonterra, for instance, which had close partnerships with government. And, you know how it works. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Sure.
And so they were in positions of power to say, we can't carry on our, in our industry without these exemptions for our integral members of senior staff, probably. And that ticked the box in terms of their exemptions. But yeah, drilling down into the details of exactly how many people we're not sure at the moment. As I say, the approximate figure is 11,000. I think the breakdown by area, what we call the old DHBs, the district health boards, which have now, that's another example of how they've obfuscated the data, because actually the district health boards have been amalgamated into a central healthcare system, a bit like they've done in other countries. So, sorry.
That's all right.
So that's a way of.
So Ursula, it strikes me, firstly, obviously, you're having to work incredibly hard to try and uncover this information, but also it strikes me we're not seeing this level of curiosity or determination or investigation from New Zealand media, from New Zealand academia. No one else seems to be trying to get to the bottom of really much when it comes to COVID. There's an astonishing level of incuriosity, and certainly in Australia. It appears to me in New Zealand as well. What do you put that down to?
Oh, yeah, it's really difficult. There's obviously lots of people in positions of power who recognise that what they did was wrong, ethically wrong, anti-science, etc. The corporate playbook really is a part of them doubling down on their mistakes. They can't accept that they made a mistake because that would open them up to all kinds of criticism and litigation, etc. There is obviously some people who are, waving flags. Winston Churchill, Winston at New Zealand First, Winston Peters. He has been vocal in calling for a COVID inquiry. I've not checked this morning, but I presume they still haven't finalised the coalition government. It's still ongoing in their negotiations, and that will be a big sticking point because Luxon and the others in Parliament are pretty much stuck in that cognitive dissonance space where they don't want to even accept what went on. They just want to carry on and regardless. So yeah, it will be very interesting to see how the next few months develop in terms of an awareness of what's happening. Of course, in the background, we've got these excess all-cause mortality stacking up, and the healthcare system here. The hospitals, I don't know, what they're like where you are, Topher, but certainly the hospitals here, there's horrendous waiting lists, even to get into emergency. It's hours of waiting and short-staffed and just, awful, really, situation.
Yeah, it's certainly not a good time to get sick in Australia. I can tell you that much. Now, you've had some fairly unkind things to say about academia in New Zealand, and in particular, and we'll put a link to this Substack of yours into the comments section under this video so that people can find it. You're alleging, and I've just got it here. Orwellian Health New Zealand claims evidence... no, excuse me, that's the wrong one. I've got multiple of your Substack. I recommend people go and read Ursula's Substack. It's actually really good. New Zealand, this is the correct one. New Zealand universities spent millions silencing academics during COVID era. That's a hell of an allegation. What have you uncovered?
Yes, well, many of my colleagues in academia have experienced the various ways that the corporate playbook can silence uncomfortable truths, as it's known. And yeah, my suspicions about how the various academics that undoubtedly were speaking out, like you and I, about the lockdowns, etc., and later the mandates, there was definitely a specific strategy of silencing those dissenting voices. And one of those strategies would inevitably lead to those people being bullied out of their institutions. And so one way of investigating what that actually looks like is how many non-disclosure agreements, gagging clauses, have been issued by the various universities in New Zealand over the last few years. So it didn't give me what I hoped for, but it did give me some indication that there was definitely an increase in those NDAs from all the universities, or most of them, some more than others, over the COVID mandate period, which would indicate that, you know, there were people that felt for whatever reason they couldn't carry on in their role.
Yeah. They were leaving and then being gagged. Presumably their package on their way out the door would have been contingent on them signing some paperwork. That's usually how these sorts of things go. Absolutely. And that's across the board. I mean, I don't know whether you listened to Cheryl Atkinson, the award-winning journalist who's, you know, standing up for free speech in the media, but you know, that's one of the things she speaks about and has written about extensively, the ways that journalists with, you know, trying to expose meaningful, you know, uncomfortable information about what's going on, if it doesn't fit the narrative, or if it's hurtful to a profitable company, that article won't be published. And if the journalist keeps insisting on trying to follow that pathway, then they get, you know, there's all kinds of legalities involved in terms of surveillance techniques and bullying them out. And it often ends in an NDA, so that they sign get a compensation package and walk away without. I mean, it's just ridiculous that you know, the levels that these corporates will go to make sure that there's nothing that's allowed to be said against them, and that's how the PR machinery works. You know, lots of people aren't aware of what goes on in the background at some of these companies. Well, I just finished rereading 1984, and just to refresh it in my memory, and it's all sounding a little bit too eerily, uncomfortably close to the fiction that I just finished reading. Ursula, thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for coming on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for watching the Aussie Wire News. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. You can catch up on past episodes at theaussiewire.com. Be sure to join our email list while you're there, and be sure to read our amazing blog posts from guest authors including Joanne Nova, Rebecca Barnett, Alex Story, Crystal Mitchell, myself of course, and there are other guest authors as well. Follow all of our socials via @theaussiewire, and please help to spread the word. I'm Topher Field, and this is the Aussie Wire.